The most dangerous experiments in human history didn't happen in laboratories. They happened in grocery stores, in pay packets, in pension accounts. They happened the moment a government decided that instead of raising taxes or admitting failure, it would quietly flip the printing press to maximum and hope that people wouldn't notice the value of their money evaporating until it was too late. Hyperinflation isn't just an economic disaster. It is a psychological weapon. It rewires how people think about trust, promise, fairness, even right and wrong. In a world where money dies overnight, virtues like patience, honesty, and long-term thinking don't simply become harder, they start to look irrational. And when enough people decide that morality is unaffordable, a society doesn't just get poorer, it becomes something else. Tonight, we're going to walk through the forgotten hyperinflation experiments that turn entire nations into behavioral test labs. Experiments no ethics committee would ever approve, but which still shape your economy, your politics, and your personal relationship with money today. Because once you see what happens to ordinary people when prices spin out of control, you'll never look at your bank balance, your savings, or your own moral compass in quite the same way. Hyperinflation is usually described with numbers. Prices doubled every few days. Bills paid in the morning were worthless by afternoon. These statistics are shocking, but they miss the deeper story. Hyperinflation is not just about what happens to prices. It's about what happens to people. At its core, hyperinflation is a breakdown of belief. Money is supposed to be a promise, a claim on the future, a store of trust between strangers. But in every hyperinflation case, that promise is abused until it snaps. Governments discover that printing new money is easier than confronting hard choices, and in the process, they run an involuntary experiment on millions of human minds. What happens when the future can no longer be trusted and only the next 5 minutes matter? This is the hidden premise of hyperinflation. Change the rules of money, and you change the rules of morality. The politician in the smoke-filled cabinet room who signs the order to issue one more batch of notes doesn't think of it this way. The central banker, staring at a crisis dashboard, tells himself it's temporary, necessary for stability. But on the street, in the market, in the home, people are being pushed into a new ethical universe, one where survival means breaking the old rules. To see how this begins, step into a bakery in Berlin, early in the 1920 seconds. The air is thick with the smell of rye and coal smoke. A line of tired faces snakes out the door and onto the pavement. Mothers clutch children with one hand and stacks of banknotes with the other, notes bound up with string like bundles of scrap paper. By the time they reach the counter, the price of bread has already changed. A clerk in a flour-dusted apron grips a piece of chalk, wiping and rewriting the numbers on the board every hour. He's not trying to cheat anyone, he's trying to stay alive. If he sticks to yesterday's prices, he can't afford tomorrow's flour. So he does the arithmetic, raises the price, and watches as one more pair of eyes hardens with resentment. Now shift scenes. Paris, more than a century earlier. The revolution has toppled the old regime, and the streets are buzzing with rhetoric about liberty, equality, fraternity. To pay its debts and fund its new order, the revolutionary government begins issuing paper money called assignats, supposedly backed by confiscated church lands. At first, it feels like magic, a financial shortcut to a fairer world. But soon the temptation grows. Why stop at a little new money when you can print a lot? More notes are issued. Prices rise. Shopkeepers demand more assignats, then demand gold instead. The government blames speculators and enemies of the people, passes laws against hoarding, and sends some of the accused to the guillotine. The economic experiment has quietly become a moral purge. In every hyperinflation story, there is a moment like this, where a technical fix crosses an invisible line. The goldsmith becomes the central banker. The emergency measure becomes policy. And paper promises pile up faster than real wealth. On paper, the country is richer than ever. On the street, people are trading jewelry for potatoes. So how does this experiment actually work? You can picture a healthy money system as a kind of slow heartbeat. People earn. They save, they spend. Money circulates, but it also rests. That resting in bank accounts, pensions, savings jars, is what allows long-term projects to exist. Homes to be bought, businesses to be built, futures to be imagined. Hyperinflation is what happens when the heartbeat turns into a panic. It usually begins with a crisis, a war, a revolution, a collapse in tax revenues, an unsustainable pile of debts. The government needs more money than it can honestly raise, so it borrows. When lenders begin to doubt repayment, it prints. At first, nothing dramatic happens. A little extra money lubricates the system. Wages seem easier to pay, bills get covered, politicians congratulate themselves. But underneath, something subtle changes. The link between money and reality loosens. The new notes in circulation are not matched by new goods and services. They are claims without substance, tickets without seats. Once people notice, the psychology shifts. Instead of thinking money today will buy similar things tomorrow, they begin to think money today will buy more than money tomorrow. That tiny inversion flips the script of rational behavior. Saving becomes foolish. Spending becomes urgent. Why hold on to cash that is melting? This is the feedback loop of hyperinflation. The government prints to cover its shortfall. Prices rise as more money chases the same goods. People rush to spend faster, which looks like increased demand, pushing prices even higher. The authorities see prices rising and respond by printing even more to help with the cost of living. What began as a trickle becomes a flood. On a spreadsheet, this looks like a vertical line of numbers. In human lives, it looks like this. A worker is paid once a week, then once a day, then twice a day. His wife meets him at the factory gate at noon, snatches the wages from his hands, and runs to the market before the price of cooking oil doubles again. Not because they are greedy, but because waiting even a few hours is now a form of self-harm. In normal times, morality says, be prudent, think long-term, don't gamble with your future. In hyperinflation, morality whispers something else. If you don't grab what you can now, you are abandoning your family. The person who hoards food is no longer purely selfish. In the eyes of their children, they are responsible. The shopkeeper who hides stock under the counter and sells only for hard currency is not just a profiteer. In his own mind, he is defending his livelihood from a government that broke its promise first. Slowly, silently, the experiment is working. People who once prided themselves on honesty begin rounding up prices a little more aggressively. The line between creative survival and theft blurs. Taking an extra bag of flour from the warehouse doesn't feel like stealing, not when the value of your wages just halved in a week. The moral language people use to justify their choices changes, word by word. Back in Weimar Germany, this moral shift is everywhere. University professors sell their book collections on the street. Middle-class families who once saw themselves as guardians of culture now barter heirlooms for coal. Pensioners who spent decades doing the right thing by saving find that their lifetime of discipline now buys a few loaves of bread. The story they were told about virtue and reward has been reversed. Hyperinflation punishes precisely the people who believed most strongly in the old rules. If you lived frugally, saved your money, avoided speculation, you lose. If you borrowed recklessly and bought hard assets, a house, a factory, a stock of goods, you might come out ahead as your debts evaporate in real terms. The gambler is rewarded, the conservative is ruined. What does that do to a culture's sense of justice? Consider another case, less famous, but even more extreme. After the Second World War, in parts of Eastern Europe, prices didn't just double every few weeks, they doubled every few hours. The numbers on banknotes became absurd, climbing into the billions and trillions. Shopkeepers stopped bothering to count change. They weighed bundles of currency on scales like vegetables. Money, the symbol of order and measure, had become a joke. In such an environment, ordinary social contracts disintegrate. Why honor a long-term lease when both parties know the rent will be meaningless in a month? Why respect a salary agreement fixed in nominal terms? Employers try to protect themselves by indexing wages or paying partly in goods. Workers demand raises not because they suddenly became less loyal, but because failing to do so would mean starving. In the shadows, new currencies emerge. Gold coins, foreign banknotes, Cigarettes, coffee, fuel, even jars of cooking oil become units of account. People begin to trust these improvised monies more than their official currency. The government calls this black market activity. From the citizen's perspective, it is an attempt to recover some kind of moral order, a way to anchor value back to something that feels real. Look at Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Officially, there was still a national currency. Unofficially, people measured the worth of everything in US. Dollars, South African rand, or bags of maize. Teachers, nurses, and civil servants kept going to work long after their salaries had stopped making economic sense, supported by relatives abroad or small side hustles. Holding on to a sense of dignity became an act of defiance against the numbers printed on the notes. But the experiment doesn't stop at markets and wages. Hyperinflation seeps into relationships. Marriages strain under the stress of constant scarcity. Parents must choose between paying for medicine or food, knowing that next week the choice may disappear altogether. Friendships fracture over unpaid informal debts that inflate out of control. Trust, the invisible glue of any society, decays faster than the currency itself. At the same time, new moral codes emerge. Helping someone jump the queue becomes an act of loyalty. Smuggling becomes a calling, rebranded as finding a way. People who can navigate the chaos, who know which official to bribe, which border to cross, which warehouse has stock, acquire a new kind of status. Competence in the black market becomes more valuable than virtue in the official one. Governments, sensing loss of control, often respond with a familiar script. They blame greedy businesses, speculators, hoarders. They pass price controls, threatening jail for anyone who sells above a fixed rate. On paper, this looks like a return to moral clarity, the state punishing bad actors. In practice, shelves empty. Production collapses further, and more economic activity shifts into the shadows. This is the cruel irony of hyperinflation as a moral experiment. The same authorities who weaken the currency by abusing it demand obedience from citizens whose entire survival now depends on quietly breaking the rules. The law says one thing, reality says another. Living ethically becomes a negotiation between the two. You might think these stories belong to distant times and failed states, but the logic that produced them is not extinct. It has simply evolved. Today, in many advanced economies, you don't see people pushing wheelbarrows of cash. You see something subtler, a slow erosion of purchasing power, decade by decade. House prices detached from wages, education and healthcare costs rising faster than incomes. Asset prices inflated by years of low interest rates and easy money, while cash savings quietly lose value in real terms. The lesson people absorb is not shouted in the streets, it is whispered in balance sheets. Don't hold cash, buy assets. Don't trust pensions, speculate. Don't expect loyalty to be rewarded. Expect the game to be rigged in favor of those closest to the financial tap. Is it any wonder that YOLO trading, meme stocks, and speculative frenzies feel, to many, less like madness and more like a rational response to a system they suspect is wired against patient savers? The mechanisms are different, but the psychology rhymes. When central banks promise to do whatever it takes and inject oceans of liquidity into markets, they are making a bet that they can expand money faster than fear, without triggering a panic about the currency itself. For the most part, in stable countries, they succeed. Inflation is contained, at least officially. But the deeper signal sent to the population is clear. Money is flexible, and rules can be bent when the stakes are high enough. Some people look at this and conclude, the system is unfair, I might as well play aggressively. Others retreat, feeling powerless and confused. The traditional moral stories about hard work, saving, and delayed gratification start to sound like relics. In their place, new narratives take root about hustle, arbitrage, gaming algorithms, and getting in early. The emotional tone shifts from trust to suspicion, from patience to urgency. The forgotten hyperinflation experiments of the past are not just cautionary tales about printing too much money. They are case studies, and how quickly human beings will adjust their morals when the environment punishes old virtues and rewards new vices. Most people in those crises did not wake up one morning and decide to become greedy or dishonest. They woke up, looked at prices, looked at their children, and realized that the cost of obeying the old rules had become unbearable. This is the uncomfortable truth. Morality is not floating above economics. It is embedded in incentives, in institutions, in the stability of promises. A society that constantly debases its currency is, in a very real sense, running live experiments on its citizens' souls. How much uncertainty can they take before they give up on long-term thinking? How much perceived injustice before they stop believing that honesty pays? None of this means we are doomed to repeat the worst episodes. Central banks have learned from past disasters. We have better data, more tools, and, at least in theory, stronger safeguards. But the temptation that drove leaders in revolutionary France, in Weimar Germany, in countless other crises has not vanished. The temptation to solve political and fiscal problems by quietly shifting the burden onto the currency and thus onto everyone who uses it. So what can you, an individual living far from breadlines and banknote piles, take from these forgotten experiments? First, an understanding. Money is not neutral. It shapes behavior. It can encourage patience and cooperation or panic and opportunism. Every time the rules of money change, the rules of morality bend with them. Second, a kind of humility. It's easy to look back at those who lived through hyperinflation and judge their actions. The black market trader, the hoarder, the speculator, but put yourself in their shoes, with a salary dissolving every day and children to feed, and ask what you would really do. The line between good and bad behavior is thinner than we like to admit when survival is on the table. Finally, a call to awareness. You don't control global monetary policy, but you can choose to notice the signals your own society is sending about time, value, and trust. Do your institutions reward short-term gambles or long-term responsibility? Are you building your life on assumptions about money that could shift under your feet? History doesn't repeat, it reveals. Hyperinflation revealed how quickly human morality can be rearranged when the measuring stick of value goes haywire. If you understand those experiments, you can recognize the early signs when money begins to drift away from reality, even in quieter forms. And in a world where the rules of finance are constantly being rewritten, that awareness is its own kind of wealth. Because when you see clearly how money shapes behavior, you're no longer just another subject in the experiment. You're awake in the lab, watching the dials, deciding consciously who you want to be.